Okay, welcome to Inside the Challenge. I have with me today David Hine of David Hine Consulting Inc. David is a long tenured fire code and building code consultant in the city of Toronto and in some ways beyond. And he's got a really interesting topic to discuss today. So, without me talking more, David, the screen is yours.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my
Let me,
pleasure. Thanks for saying yes to this.
well, it's an awesome opportunity. And as a building code consultant, I get frustrated sometimes with how people read the building code. And part of the things I do is try to get people motivated on how to read the building code in a way that gives them more opportunity. So, I'm sharing my screen with you. You should see
Yeah,
this beautiful thing about the National Building Code that's should be on one side of it.
yeah,
And the building code is a language onto itself, Jonathan. It's not English. It's not, and it's not intended to slight those who are not English speaking as firstborn. English to the building code language is a language onto itself, and you have to understand the permissions that it's giving you while understanding the basic rules of how to read the building code. And it's again, just reading the building code is like reading any other legislation. So this the thoughts I'm expressing today can be applied to the International Building Code. They can be applied to the Highway Traffic Act. As long as you understand the context to which it's given,
yep.
um, it can then help you understand how to make a building better or how to do something differently. And comprehension, in my mind, is the more you understand the building code, the greater opportunities it allows you to design to. And more opportunities means more innovation or
Yep.
more interesting designs. So
So,
the
so I
first
guess the challenge here is understanding how to read through the code because the code is written with black print on white paper, but there's a whole lot of gray when you read.
there is, and there's exceptions, and there's rules,
Right.
and there's a lot of depth to those words, and some of it's really obvious, but sometimes you have to sometimes somebody has to draw your attention to how obvious it is for it to become obvious.
Yes.
um, and so I've got three examples,
Please
and I know
do
we've
it.
got about 10 minutes to talk about this.
Yeah.
So the first example, um, the building code in this example, and I've extracted portions out of the National Building Code to illustrate my points. And so in this example, clause 2A, so it's the one that starts with A, of floor assemblies.
Yeah.
It's giving you a choice. Floor assemblies shall be fire separations, and if of combustible construction, shall have a fire resistance rating not less than 45 minutes. And then it's comma and. So this clause 2A is giving you a choice. It's saying if of combustible construction, you need to provide the floor assembly with a 45-minute fire resistance rating. But what happens if you're not combustible construction? For example, if you're non-combustible construction,
Hmm.
what's the fire resistance rating required to be?
Well, if
And
it's not combustible, it's zero.
it's absolutely you're absolutely right. But some people don't get that if of combustible construction. They sort of
Right.
it doesn't make sense to them, so they blank out the word if of combustible construction. So
Right.
they just assume all floor assemblies using this example, whether combustible, non-combustible, mass timber, or some other material, has to have a fire resistance rating of not less than 45 minutes. However, if you are of non-combustible construction, your floor does not need to have a fire resistance rating. And a fire resistance rating is typically assigned or achieved by putting drywall on the underside of your wood structure or a spray-on foam or an intumescent paint, which is a cost. But if can you imagine if you're a not if you can build your building out of non-combustible construction, and celebrate the open web steel joists. So it's a different tool in your architectural toolbox if you read this correctly.
Hmm.
If you read it incorrectly and just assign a 45-minute fire resistance rating, then typically you're not going to have open web steel joists or exposed structure or an exposed column. You can't do that.
Hmm.
But if you do read this correctly, then your steel column could be exposed in the middle of a floor area because
Right.
it doesn't need that fire resistance rating.
Right.
Now, keep in mind, this isn't going to apply to, a 10-story building. It's typically only going to apply to a 2-story or a 3-story or maybe even a 4-story building, unlikely a 4-story.
Right.
But keep, you've got to, the architects and users of the building code have to understand that the code here is giving you the choice. You just have to pick up on that choice because if of combustible construction means you have a choice.
Hmm.
And that's really an important um, understanding because the downfall is if you don't understand it, then you're rating your floors. And with ratings come fire dampers
Right.
and closures and stuff like that, which
Yep.
increase the cost. Now, that takes me probably to another point of the building code is this minimum standard to which we all developers all drive towards. Well, that minimum standard is a pretty high standard. And so to suggest that it's just the minimum, yes, it is the minimum standard, but it is the standard to which our province and our country has said that's the standard to which you have to achieve.
Hmm.
Anything beyond that is your choice,
Right.
the choice of the owner. It's not really the choice of the architect. It's the choice of the owner. Hey, do you want to rate your floors? You're not required to. Do you want to spend an extra
X.
X thousands of dollars?
Yeah.
That's
Right.
the choice of the owner. If say for example, Jonathan, your company said, sure, we want to spend an extra $10,000. We'll just pass that on to our clients to rate this floor, even though we don't need to. Well, I that's great, but I think we have to have that
The conversation.
discussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
Understand how it impacts budget. Okay.
right. So
What's the next one?
what's the next one? Okay, the next one. Whoops. So there we go. So here's an example where the building code doesn't even talk about something. So this is an assembly occupancy, typically a restaurant up to 2-story sprinklered. So if you think about what we just read about in the previous example, where it talked specifically about floors, floors shall be fire separations and if of whatever. In this example, it doesn't even mention the word floor in a 2-story building and what it has to be built of, whether it needs a fire resistance rating, whether it needs to be a fire separation. It's completely silent. It's totally omitted the word floors. And I'm just going to skip back to the previous one as a comparison. So here's a multi-story building, and it's saying floor assemblies, and it's talking about load-bearing walls specifically, right? So this next example doesn't even talk about it. So now we go to application. In the event that you are able to classify your building to this article 32227, which as a 2-story building could be 600 square meters, and those that speak Imperial's about 6,200 square feet, I should say, in building area, which is the footprint of the building. What is the floor? What can the floor be built of? And
Right.
can it be porous? Well, because the code doesn't talk about floors having to be constructed as a fire separation, it's omitted floors and the structure and the mezzanines. You can build that floor out of wood, or you can build it out of non-combustible construction if you wish. You can have holes through the floor. You don't have to protect the one story from the next story. The code is silent on this one.
Right.
So by omission, if you understand the pattern to which the codes are written for these articles under 32226 and 27, 28, and you notice, hey, it doesn't even talk about floors. It means that you're not regulated in the construction of the floor. It doesn't need a fire resistance rating. It doesn't need to have a fire. It's not a fire separation, which means you can do just about anything you want on the floor. So, and this, A2s also are like daycare centers and schools and stuff like that. So it gives you a really great opportunity to
Freedom.
of freedom of design, which is what architects want.
Yeah.
Do what you want. I
Yeah.
don't care what you're doing with the floors because the code is silent. And the reason the code is silent is because it's omitted that criteria.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's another really powerful tool. But the
Not
problem is you have
non-tidbit
to,
of information.
yes, but you have to be able to say, hold on, this one doesn't even talk about
Yeah.
floors, whereas the previous,
Does.
everything else
Yeah.
in 322 does.
Yeah.
So you have to understand, again, as sort of what you've described, it's the black and the white and the gray. This is just totally white, but you
Yeah.
have to understand that that white is telling you a lot.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be anything in this example.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so the third example
Yeah.
is I just again I extracted a bit out of the building code, and it's for janitors' rooms. And sentence one starts, except as permitted by sentence two and three, a room or space within a floor area, blah 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 blah. I found that when people are faced with the term except at the very beginning of a sentence, their mind turns to mush and they don't know what the hell to do. And so they start thinking about, well, maybe I've got to read sentence two first and then sentence three and then go back to sentence one. My advice on that one is to rewrite it. And that's how I use the code is I rewrite the whole thing. So I delete the word except as permitted by sentences two and three, and I rewrite it as you see under the fundamental
Yeah.
rule is a room or space within a floor area for the storage of janitorial supplies shall be separated from the remainder of the building by a fire separation having a fire resistance rate not less than an hour. So
Mhm.
that basically is the fundamental rule. My rule is when you see something that starts with the word a sentence that starts with the word except,
Yeah.
ignore everything between the word and the comma.
Yeah.
Ignore, strip all that out, pretend it doesn't exist, understand the rule. And the rule is janitor's rooms needs a 1 hour fire separation.
Right.
That's the
Yeah.
rule.
Yeah.
Okay, now that I know what the rule is, you can start applying the exceptions. And the exceptions are sentences two and three. If the floors aren't an hour, then your janitor's closet doesn't have to be an hour. It's permitted to be 45 minutes.
Right.
Okay. And then the third exception to that is you don't even need the fire resistance rating if your floor area is sprinklered throughout. And so this third example is simply a tool on how to read the building code or
Yes.
whatever legislation it is.
Yeah.
When you see the word except, just pretend the exception doesn't exist.
Right.
Understand the fundamental rule.
Yeah.
Once you understand the fundamental rule, then the exceptions become a little bit easier
Right.
to understand. And I sort of think that if you can at least understand that rule, then you can perhaps struggle with other rules. And
Right.
another rule, for example, is, this sentence two, and I don't know how much time we've got left, but sentence two, there's an or here. So this is giving you a choice between A or B. So there's a few more rules. I've got probably about 10 of them that I could go over, and I know we don't have any time,
We're
but
gonna
that's
no, we're
all.
gonna because we're gonna do this again. That's the
Yeah, I
beauty
guess.
of what this is. This
Yeah.
format is designed, it's specifically giving people a short burst of information that empowers them, makes them feel connected to it, and then they can work from it, and then we give them another one another time. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. David, thank you. It was great. It's exactly what I was hoping for.
Good. Well, the building code can be so powerful and so much fun to use because it gives you
Yeah,
so many options, but you just have to understand it.
you got to find the gray. Thanks, David.
Indeed. You're welcome.